Austin, let's start on that last line. Are we headed into a recession? And the President of the United States simply says, well, it may be.
Yeah, look, I don't know how you can deny what's happening in the economy. It's shutting down. And so much of our economy is driven by services, which are exactly the things that shut down when we withdraw. I think the deeper issue is, and I welcomed the president's tone today. It was a marked difference from his tone in all previous weeks, which in those previous weeks, he's been trying to play down the importance of this and saying, no, it's going away. It's nothing. You can go to work. We only have 14 cases. It'll soon be 0. And the problem is, like my old dear friend Paul Volcker used to say during the financial crisis, in a crisis, the only asset you have is your credibility. And we have spent so much time destroying our credibility that I'm really afraid for the president and for us that it might be too late to now try to turn it around. Whether you like the president or don't like him, we need him to succeed here. We need him to rise into the job. And he really has not been doing that. Well,
we can welcome the change of tone today, but we saw in the polling that I talked about earlier in the show that this president misled Republicans into not taking this seriously. And so we have a right to believe tonight that there are people infected tonight. There are people who are dying tonight because they listened to Donald Trump. Let's listen to Donald Trump comparing this tone change. Let's listen to what he said about the governor whose state at that time had the most coronavirus reported cases, Jay Inslee, governor of Washington. This is just 10 days ago. Let's listen to this.
Well, I told Mike not to be complimentary of the governor because that governor is a snake.
That governor is a snake. Now let's listen to what Donald Trump said about the governors today.
Well, we had a great talk with the governors today. I think it was a really great talk. There's a tremendous coordination. There's a tremendous spirit that we have together with the governors. And that's pretty much, for the most part, bipartisan.
Ben Rhodes, is that a welcome change of tone, or is that a madman whose meds might be working today?
No, I think, Lawrence, what it is a president who's finally realized that reality has caught up to him. What he's been doing throughout this crisis is tend to his short-term political interests. So for a time, you'll remember he was trying to calm markets with tweets saying this would go away. He was trying to keep the numbers down, literally, of cases in this country by not letting a cruise ship dock in California, perhaps by not moving heaven and earth to get tests out when they're needed. But the reality is we have to face the fact that as a country, we're going into this crisis without a president acting like we would normally expect a president to act. You would expect a president to show empathy for people who are suffering because of this disease or who have lost loved ones. He talks about himself instead. You would expect a president to be establishing a national baseline for how we're responding, for how we're testing, for how we're surging health capacity. Instead, what we have is a patchwork response of 50 different states and localities making their own decisions without that kind of presidential leadership. You would expect a president to be also leading the world. And right now, frankly, this president is so not respected around the world that nobody's really looking to the American presidency to set a tone for how we're going to deal with both the pandemic crisis and the recession that is coming. So my hope is, yes, that this is a change in tone, but we have to face the reality as a country that we're really relying on ourselves here as citizens to engage in social distancing, as governors and mayors and community leaders who are conveying this message. And hopefully this president can catch up to the leadership that we're seeing in state houses and cities around the country instead of trying to deny the very reality that his country is dealing with.